Welcome back, everyone. It's Politics is Survival, and it was kind of a wild, bouncy day, and I really want to put a big thanks out to Reade, who really came to the rescue, and then another person that came to the rescue as well and came to join me. And I've been on his show, and he's amazing, and I share so many of his tweets. In fact, I kind of have to stop sharing so many of his tweets sometimes because it looks like I'm stalking otherwise. But he's so funny but yet so pointed with them. And he has a great presence and a great show. And that's Garland Nixon Garland. So welcome. And Garland. And I was reversing Garland, and welcome to the show. And
thank you.
Yeah. And before I came on, I was talking to Reade, and we didn't know the mics were hot. And I was trying to figure out, I'm going to show this clip, and I was trying to figure out the announcer at RT because I couldn't think of his name. And it's, of course I know it. It's Ewan O'Neill, super nice. And we were talking, Garland, about the shooting that just happened. Mm-hmm. And I made a few comments about my views. And what I wanted you to do was just see that it's a very short clip, but just see it and then give me your opinion of it.
Certainly.
And kind of what you think.
Okay.
So here we go. I'll let Reade put it up.
New York state officials have pledged to fight right-wing extremism following Saturday's mass shooting in Buffalo. A gunman killed 10 people, most of them black, at a local supermarket. Authorities see the attack as being racially motivated.
But mark my words, we'll be aggressive in our pursuit of anyone who subscribes to the ideals professed by other white supremacists, and how there's a feeding frenzy on social media platforms where hate festers more hate. That has to stop.
The suspect, a white teenage male, allegedly posted a statement expressing neo-Nazi sentiments. Images of the manifesto, which included the so-named Black Sun Nazi symbol, spread online. Social media users were quick to point out that Azov battalion fighters in Ukraine use the same sign as part of their emblem.
NATO is arming and training neo-Nazis in Ukraine's white supremacist Azov movement, who use the same fascist symbols as the terrorist mass shooter in Buffalo, New York.
Weird to see a lot of people praising neo-Nazis from Azov for 3 months 24/7 on here suddenly being outraged with another local neo-Nazi from Buffalo. They will go back to cheerleading for Azov tomorrow and tell how they aren't actual Nazis, and it's a difficult issue.
After the Buffalo shooting, I see liberals are back to declaring Nazis bad. Should be interesting how they explain how the Stalingrad Black Sun is a Nazi emblem on an American terrorist but patriotism when worn by Ukrainian Azov soldiers.
Also, the same symbol worn by Ukrainian soldiers emerged in a tweet posted by NATO, congratulating Ukrainian women on International Women's Day. The tweet was later deleted after sparking criticism from people who spotted the emblem. Well, signs of extremist views have featured in a number of Western media reports during the conflict, but given little comment. For example, the BBC interviewed a soldier who had a Nazi badge on his jacket here, while the Sun newspaper showed a funeral ceremony but failed to mention an attendee clearly wearing another SS division emblem. Let's cross live now to Tara Reade. Tara's an author and former US Senate aide and is very welcome to the program. Hi, Tara. Many observers, no problem, have spoken about the hypocrisy of the Azov battalion, known for having neo-Nazi members, essentially getting good publicity in the West during the war. What's your take on that connection?
Well, I think it's really stunning how America has been, lifting up these neo-Nazis since 2014, since the Meadows, which Victoria Nuland was there. And as you know, Julian Assange exposed the coup that was American-backed in 2014, and Azov battalion was part of that. And 8 to 11% of the Ukrainian government had neo-Nazis. So now the support for these neo-Nazis in Ukraine has come home, and you see this horrible massacre of 10 people that just occurred, and 2 others injured. that was racially motivated by somebody with extreme views, and followed a manifesto, and also referred to the Azov battalion with the symbol. So the question for American citizens is, why are we poised to give $40 billion in weapons that will go into the hands of neo-Nazis in Ukraine? And you see right now on Western media, they're discussing gun control, they're discussing more censorship by social media of these extreme neo-Nazis' views, but they're not talking about the elephant in the room, which is that the US government and NATO are funding neo-Nazis in Ukraine, and that sentiment is spreading across the globe.
Tara, I remember back in 2019, the media, and particularly the New York Times, pointed out that the symbol displayed by the Christchurch shooter in New Zealand was also used by the Azov battalion. That was seen in a lot of places. Why haven't they done that in this case, do you think?
I think right now what you're seeing is a Western spin, because they know that there's a collective guilt about furthering this neo-Nazi extremist views, and not dealing with it properly. So, you know, US citizens and European citizens need to ask why their tax money is going overseas to fund, you know, this proxy war against Russia that the US and NATO is engaged in, and funding extreme neo-Nazis, which is only going to spread more fascism throughout the world, the United States included, as we just saw.
Tara, time has beaten us, but thank you so much for your time today on Sunday of all days as well. Tara Reade, author and former US Senate aide.
Thank you.
Serbia will refrain from imposing.
Yeah, so if you can go ahead and take that down. So what's your thoughts on that, Garland?
Oh, a number of things. You know, as soon as it happened, because I've been really covering, I've been one of the people that have really been covering the Nazi Ukraine issue for months and months now, for a long time. As soon as that happened, my initial reaction was blowback, that this is blowback.
Mm-hmm.
The United States is lionizing these Nazis. If you look at the narrative around the Azov battalion in the US, right? They're the toughest fighters. They're Ukraine's toughest fighters. They're the last holdouts. They're like everybody else has fallen in Mariupol, but not the Azov battalion. They're the toughest guys you can possibly get, right? Now, you put that together with the fact that they are avowed neo-Nazis, the message that you are sending to people throughout the West is the Nazis are the toughest people. Here's where it gets dangerous, and here's where I connect it to the Buffalo shooter. He's an 18-year-old kid. You're an 18, you want to be a superhero. Everybody, when you're still a kid, you've got a man's body, but a child's mind at that age. Trust me, I remember. And you want to be a superhero, and you're bigger and you're stronger and you can do things now, like you're not a little kid that can be pushed around. And if you're a kid like this who maybe had some mental illness, some problems, whatever in life, which a lot of people do, okay, it's not unusual. Now you look for an opportunity to be like the Azov battalion. Well, if you want to be like the Azov battalion, you got to shoot somebody, because that's what the Azov battalion does. They're army men, right? You got to be an army guy. So we're creating an environment where we're lionizing these neo-Nazis, and where these young men, they're going online and they're seeing, wow, look at the Azov battalion. Oh, I'm watching videos of them. Look, they got camouflage stuff and guns. They sure are tough. Let me turn on CNN. And here's Joe Blow from the Azov. They literally had people from the Azov battalion on CNN and all of these media showing them. So you're a kid. You're taking this in. Man, they're looking pretty tough. And so I see this as blowback, where the US has created an environment where we're literally saying to the young people of this society, the toughest fighters, the real superheroes are neo-Nazis. And that's the blowback is starting to, this is the first. It won't be the last. This is the first of many neo-Nazi. And keep in mind, it's not like a Ukrainian person who was a neo-Nazi caught a plane over here and did it. Our leaders literally transferred the mindset from the Ukrainian neo-Nazis to young people right here in this country through their propaganda. It's a sad state of affairs, and we're going to continue to pay for this for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, and you know, just before we came on, we were discussing the fact that it was announced that due to cloture is what the Senate evoked. They've evoked that to speedy pass this 40 billion, to overcome Rand Paul's objection when he single-handedly kind of delayed that. So $40 billion is just going straight to weapons manufacturers, just lining their pockets, because the reality is they don't know where, number one, they don't know where the weapons are really going because they've lost track of many of them. Number two, they don't even know how many of these weapons are going to end up in the hands of neo-Nazis. I mean, do you have any thoughts on that? Or
yes, sadly, and they don't care. Because here's the reality. Here's part of it. It's not all of it, but there's a number of things going on here. Part of it is, of course, the ideology of the neoconservatives, or to me, they're proto-fascists. Yeah. They fit in perfect with the Nazis if you think about it. But part of it is, of course, the ideology of they're going to be on the border of Russia and they're going to give Russia a bloody nose. The other part of it is it's money laundering. They had a money laundering operation going on for 20 years in Afghanistan, $20 trillion leaked through the hands of wherever, disappeared into the hands of whomever. And at the end, they just left $7, $8, $10 billion worth of equipment that was left there. They left it there so you can buy some more. Who cares? They were done with it. It had been paid for. Right. They didn't want to transfer it. Who cares? So now they're like, well, that's done. Where's our next move? They're not going to close one money spigot without opening another. So now there's another money spigot. So now they don't. 40 billion, what do they care? We already know that apparently the Russians struck some weapons depots today with missiles and blew them up. Mm-hmm. So apparently, look, the Russians know Ukraine pretty well. There's a lot of stuff that they send over to a warehouse. It gets hit with a missile, boom, it goes up in smoke, which is fine for the weapons. But what do they give a shit? Excuse my language.
Yeah, they've already sold them. Yeah, you can say shit. It's all right.
Yeah.
We're on my show.
Meanwhile,
yeah,
you've got, any number of oligarchs over there. They got their, they're feeding at the public trough. They're like, yes, this money is going to go to help ordinary Ukrainians. Yeah, like the money here goes right. to help ordinary Americans. It's going to get in the hands of the oligarchs. And that stuff is going to be in Cyprus and the Isle of Man and Jersey and shell companies so fast, it's going to hit the greasy skids. And the weapons that don't get blown to smithereens by the Russians will be on the black market quicker than that money got to. It's a big scam, a $40 billion scam.
It is a big scam. And then do you remember, Garland, all those headlines about the corruption in Ukraine, like corruption that was unbelievable, like that's not even like something that we really understand here, as far as in America, although I would counter that with, yeah, we have Nancy Pelosi and we have Joe Biden, who are the most corrupt actors ever. And do you feel like the American politicians are laundering their own money through Ukraine? I'm just wondering, like, I've read some things about that, but.
It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. Like one of the things they do when they overthrow a government and they overthrow a country, as they did in 2014, is they go in and pick the bones. I remember, it's just unbelievable. If you start to dig into Ukraine, it's, you're like, Pelosi's kid was there, Romney's kid was there, Kerry's stepson was there. What the hell? All these people suddenly show up after we overthrow the government making money.
Yeah, I know.
So then here's something that I found shocking, the name. So then when the whole Nord Stream 2 thing was going on. So then Biden says, I'm going to get this guy named Amos Hochstein. He's a gas expert. I'm going to send Amos Hochstein. He's going to go over to, I guess he was his man to go over to the Germans and to somehow convince them not to do the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, right? Good old Amos Hochstein. So I'm like, well, let me start looking this guy up. The first thing I see is that when he was in the Obama administration, now how crooked is this? He's in the Obama administration. He pulled a Hunter Biden. The U.S. overthrows the government of Ukraine and inserts a puppet government, right? Mm-hmm. In Ukraine, the state gas company, this huge gas company owned by the state of Ukraine, owned by the government, is called Naftogaz, right? Mm-hmm. Well, and I'm just like randomly trying to find out who the hell Amos Hochstein is, right? I look, and the first thing I see is he's with the Obama administration. The Obama administration overthrows the government of Ukraine. He leaves the Obama administration. He joins the board of Naftogaz. the
Wow.
biggest gas company and the state-owned gas company in Ukraine. So we knock over the government. He leaves and he goes to work for their state gas company. At the same time, might I add, Hunter Biden goes over, gets a job. Everybody's got a job at a gas company in Ukraine. And then here's the hilarious thing. You know why when he resigned, you know why he said he resigned? Corruption. No. Too much corruption. I'm like,
right.
You know, man,
it
that
wasn't
dude
corrupt enough.
That guy's got guts. You leave the Obama administration, go over there, you take this cash, you don't speak the language, you just get paid, and then you're like, it's just too corrupt in this country. I'm out of here.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, you know, and now here we are, and there was a lot going on, you know, in the last week or so that was pretty disturbing, violent, upsetting. I mean, the tragedy that happened in Buffalo, that horrific execution of 10 people and injuring of 2 others. And then you had the execution of a journalist, Shireen, you know, from the Voice of Palestine, and then her funeral, when people were trying to attend her funeral. Of course, we all saw the images of the Israeli occupying forces that were taking down her casket and attacking the mourners. And it was awful. And the headlines, meanwhile, in the West were things like a bullet found. I mean, they were really all around, weaving around what actually happened, which was she was assassinated by Israeli snipers. And they didn't use those words. They said things like a bullet found her head. Like, how does, you know, it was very weird.
You know, I read a couple that said lost her life. She lost her life. Yeah. Yes, the like journalist who lost her life. It just sounds like an act of God, like she slipped on a banana peel or something like that.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
She was shot by a military sniper, an unarmed person with a press uniform on, with big white letters that said press. A sniper put their crosshairs on her and shot her dead. And the U.S. Press says she lost her life.
Yeah, I know. And but do you feel like, because of the amount of attention that got, and then what happened subsequently at her funeral, did you feel a sense of questioning finally about and recognizing that the Israeli occupiers are actually, you know, implementing apartheid, and that it's unfair and that it's brutal, and giving some attention to people maybe who don't really understand that issue or don't pay attention? What do you think?
I got to tie, you know, everything that's going on now, I tie back to the Ukraine issue for this reason.
Okay.
Whether it's the Buffalo shooting or for this reason, the U.S. empire now is in, you know, kind of having some problems, shall we say, seems to be collapsing in a number of ways. But the Ukraine incident in particular just makes the contradictions between what the leaders of our country say and what they do so glaring. You know, yes, Biden today, we're going to stand up and we're going to stop white supremacists. Oh, wait a minute. Where's that $40 billion that I'm about to give the Nazis and white supremacists? Meanwhile, yes, there are, we've got to get an international criminal court to do an investigation for war crimes in Ukraine, even though neither Russia nor the U.S. are members of the International Criminal Court. Yeah. And the U.S. literally, look it up, the 2003 Hague Invasion Act. An actual law that says that if somebody from the U.S. military or the U.S. government is taken to the Hague and tried, that the U.S. is authorized to use military to basically attack the Hague and kill everybody.
To attack Holland.
So now the U.S. says, but, you know, this is a war. I mean, after we just slaughter people by the millions and with illegal invasions all over the place, Putin's got to be investigated for war crimes. Now, today, when they asked the State Department, people of our State Department, about the war crimes investigation and the UN investigation that's been requested for the Shireen Akbella, I think her name is Akbella, I'm probably pronouncing it wrong. The U.S. said that it doesn't support, our State Department says they don't support a UN investigation, that the UN would be picking out a single country. Now, what the hell does that mean? Does the UN like investigate 5 countries at once? An investigation is an if you say this country did X, that is a single country. You're not saying a bunch of countries did it. So their argument that the U.S., the UN would be picking out a single country, and that they believed that the Israelis could do the investigation. Okay, well, I believe the Russians can do the investigation. No, that's unacceptable. So my point being this, all of these types of things that are happening are just profoundly demonstrating the contradiction between, you know, the woke empire that does everything to help the minorities or the gays or the trans people, to help some group, you know, the Black people or the BIPOCs. That's the one that kills me. Black or indigenous people of color. They're coming up with names we don't know what the hell they mean anymore. But everything they do is to help some poor downtrodden group. And meanwhile, when you look at their actions, the Palestinians are getting slaughtered, a million dead Iraqis, they're willy-nilly going around the world slaughtering people, cutting them down like cordwood. But when it's convenient for them, they're standing up for human rights.
Oh, and that's how they're trying to spin Somalia today. Because as you know, Biden, well, he was trying to do this under the radar. He was sending 500 troops in to Somalia, whereas, you know, Trump had removed them. And this brings back a memory. It's an old one though, memory from 1992. They called it the Project of Hope or something when under Bush. And don't you love how they put these woke or these really nice names around a military occupation that some people don't want and don't need, and that's violent and dropping bombs actually. So I just, this is kind of newish because it just came out today, but do you have any thoughts on just how like he tried to slip that right under the radar? Just like, oh, by the way, we're going to engage in Somalia again.
Well, and part of it is this: the U.S. is very much concerned with the Horn of Africa, Ethiopia, Eritrea, all that's going on with the TPLF right now. The U.S. tried to get, the TPLF in Ethiopia next door. I think that has a lot to do with this, that they want to get soldiers there. They're alleging for Somalia. Somalia is kind of a broken up group of territories. It's not really a country. So they start putting soldiers in there. They get a base in there, and now they can funnel weapons to the Tigray People's Liberation Front, as it were, which is really in Ethiopia, which is really an ethno-fascist group that the U.S. is trying to utilize to overthrow the duly elected government of Ethiopia, as usual. So that's what I think this is about. This is about the AFRICOM doing their dirty work and funneling weapons in Africa for some of the coup attempts and for some of the, destabilization activities that they're doing. I don't think it's just about Somalia at all, because again, Somalia is so broke. It's such a broken country that it's not a country as we understand it, like the US or Canada. It's an area that you can call a country, but it doesn't really have a ruling government that effectively controls all of the territory. It doesn't have the kinds of services and things of that nature that we understand a government that would have. So we put some people in a particular area, that's their area, and now we can fly stuff in that area and smuggle weapons, which is what we do best. It's probably another $40 billion worth of weapons going there from the underground. And of course, the Congress, I don't care what Biden asked for right now. If he says, I need $1 trillion worth of weapons to go to every country in Africa, he'll have a fight on his hands because they'll want to give him $2 trillion.
Yeah, well, it's amazing how there hasn't been much of a fight on his hands for any of the money that he's been able to pass for weapons and for engaging back into these wars. And the hypocrisy is, remember the whole thing about the endless wars and all that stuff on the campaign trail when he was talking about restoring the soul of America and all that bullshit. And we're more divided, I think. Well, we're more divided only because our consent's been manufactured and he's placed us in a position where our economy is tanking and money is going overseas to a war that no one wants, this proxy war against Russia using Ukraine. But I guess, what I want to know is, at what point are people going to start standing up and saying, stop it. We need the money here in the US. We need our infrastructure. We need housing. We need affordable medical care. I mean, do you see any kind of movement towards people demanding services rather than these endless wars? And
yeah, I think that's coming. I think that's coming over the summer. I think it's coming here. I think it's coming in Europe too, because I mean, my God, it's bad here, but Europe is a, it's a dystopian hellscape there, economically now. And how long can that last before people literally cannot afford to live? Not that if they pay all their bills, they won't have anything left. It's that they won't next winter, forget it. People in Europe, forget it. There's no way they're going to be able to pay for heating bills. I read something the other day that said they're estimating now that 43% of the people in the UK will absolutely not be able to pay for energy to heat their homes next winter. And when you consider the food shortages and things like that, there's an old saying in Europe: when the people are out of bread, it's off with the leader's head. So I suspect
France, that came from France.
How about that? I suspect that all of this dancing around, hooray, the Nazis won the Eurovision contest, is going to turn into people on the street. The pitchforks and the torches are going to come out. And they've got a bunch of idiots here running around with stinking yellow flags around their, whatever the latest current thing they've been told to put around, the latest thing they've been given an emoji for. You're being had when they say, here's an emoji and a flag or something to put around your Facebook page or your social media page. That's when you know that the current thing has changed and that you're about to be had again. But the people that buy into the current thing, Facebook, social media emoji game, are going to wake up and realize, for God's sake, it's $8 a gallon and I can't afford it. Wait a minute, I'm going into the market and I can't. So my opinion is that people are going to learn from the economic pain that's coming. That these idiots, these lunatics that are running this country, the neocons get in charge. The neocons could care less about domestic policy. They are strictly expansionist, and I argue proto-fascist. They're like, they feel as though our job is to sacrifice whatever we have to sacrifice so they can achieve their great mission, ideological mission, which is far greater than we could ever even understand as little, nothing mindless zombies. But at some point, us mindless zombies get hungry. And when we do, we get real pissed. So I suspect before the end of the summer, it's not going to be a good situation in Europe or here in the US. That a lot of this, yay, I support Ukraine, hooray for the Nazis. Not to mention the fact that I think that the reality within the next month is going to come, but by sometime in June, the reality of what's going on in Ukraine, that in all likelihood, not all likelihood, but the Russians are going to really have control of everything after this Donbass operation. So I think they're in La La Land right now, where they're all coming together thinking they have full control. But I think that they're going to have a mess on their hands by midsummer here, and especially in Europe. Social uprisings are going to start.
Yeah. And then, that's why they're starting already with a board of disinformation, the governance board with the Broadway musical dropout that now is going to use her time to censor us and
scary Poppins.
Scary Poppins, exactly. That's perfect, actually.
Well, don't you think to some extent, I felt like this all along. There's two sides of that there as well. How dystopian and Orwellian is this? The other side is, let's take the good side.
Okay.
They're desperate. It shows that they are very desperate. It shows that their narratives are so brittle, that their narratives are so easily deconstructed when all you tell is superficial lies. And if anybody turns over one shovel of dirt and digs into your lie, it falls apart. You got to shut that down. And now they're like, oh man, people are starting to ask questions about Nazis. We got to get somebody in here to sing some songs and take their mind off of it. I don't think it's going to work.
Yeah, I think the US has lost the plot. We've lost the plot. And so is Europe, NATO, they were trying so hard to villainize, demonize Russia. And now, of course, they're turning their sights to China, which is come on. It's just, when is this going to end? And I think that's the question. But you're right. I think this summer, one of the things, Garland, that I heard that really got my attention is when they were talking about food shortages, right? And I was like, oh, here it comes. If they start talking about food shortages now, which, if they're talking about food shortages, it's going to be worse than what they're saying, is what I'm saying, for them to talk about it, right?
Absolutely.
I don't think it's just fear mongering. I think it's going to be hard and it's going to be awful. And Russia supplied a great deal of wheat and fertilizer to Europe. We are not as dependent, but we have so many, so much rich resources. You think we'd be able to be self-sustaining in the food category, but apparently not. And now that you're seeing like the shipping and the problems, and you're seeing supply chain problems, I mean, it just feels like it's almost purposely being broken. That's what it feels like to me. It's like they're purposely creating a food shortage. I don't know, but maybe I'm being tinfoil hatty. You tell me.
Well, there's always that question, right? And there's always that question when you, and I've talked to a lot of people about this question, and here, and it's an obvious one. When you see people taking actions that are so obviously wrong, making decisions that are so horrendously bad, you're like, my God. Anybody can see that that's a bad decision. The question comes, are they, because there's only two questions to me. Are they that incompetent? Or is there a level of intent? Because what happens is you see something that appears so incompetent, you think to yourself, nobody could be that stupid. They have got to be doing this. So, isn't that kind of really the way, if you get down to what you're thinking, it's like you start off with, my God, those decisions are unbelievably bad. Yeah. And then it graduates to, nobody could be that stupid. It's gotta be intent. And I don't know, I know a person I've got a friend who worked in media at a very high level in Washington, D.C. for years, where he knew all the neocons. This guy worked at a big newspaper, and he wasn't a neocon, but he knew them all. And because he worked at that newspaper and he was a high level person, they all thought, these were people in the Bush administration. Right. And I'm not going to name any names because it may come out who he is, but they all thought that this guy was one of them. So they would just talk to him with the crazy neocon stuff. And he said he'd come back every day and say, my God, we're doomed, when he came back from lunch. Right. But his thing was, Garland, you have no idea how stupid these people actually are.
I know. So
his belief was, no, it's incompetence. You may say to yourself, nobody could be that stupid. Yeah, they're that stupid. I'll tell you what I remember. There was a guy named Doug Feith. He was one of the neocon deciders in the Bush administration. Ken Adelman, you remember Wolfowitz and Pearl and all of these people, right? The pure neocons, the Victoria Nulands of the world. Most people don't know, she was Dick Cheney's assistant.
Right. I did not know that. She was Dick Cheney's. That's right.
Now she's with the Democrats.
That's right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Go
on. So at any rate, and the thing about these, if you remember, General Tommy Franks had a meeting and he was working with Doug Feith, and he said, he's the stupidest effing man on earth. That's what General Tommy Franks said about Doug Feith. And amongst the neocons, he was like, he's in the group. They put him in charge of something at the Pentagon, coming up with lies, some group to come up with lies for Iraq. He's in charge of it. So it's like, in their world, he was just another guy. He was like one of the brain trust. And General Tommy Franks meets with him, works with him, goes, holy crap, he's the stupidest human being I've ever met in my life. That's how they are. So
there are no grown-ups in the room. No grown-ups in the room.
Yeah, I don't know that they're making all the decisions. I do think there are, like, for instance, I'll say this business about raising interest rates, right? They're supposed to raise interest rates to stop inflation.
Right.
But they already know. Here's what they already know. Raising interest rates slows inflation if you have a demand problem. What it does is it stops people from buying stuff, because they'll stop buying because the interest rates are too high to take out a loan. So it slows the demand, right? So raising interest rates, if the problem is demand, it'll address inflation. But the problem ain't demand now. The problem is the supply chain. People want to buy stuff, but they can't get it because it ain't there. And a big part of it is price gouging. You have all of these companies that lost money during COVID, and now they're like, I'm going to make my money back. So you have a combination of price going up because people want it, but it can't get here. And there's not enough of it. So you have scarcity that drives the price up, but that's a supply side.
Mm-hmm.
That's not demand. So realistically, raising the interest rates, the only thing, there's only one thing that'll do, drive us into a depression. Now, I'm not going to get into technicalities, but some people believe they want to put us into a depression to protect the dollar. But the bottom line is they're telling us, I'm raising interest rates to address inflation when they know that it doesn't address inflation. If inflation is coming from supply side, it will just, so are they deliberately driving us into a recession? It's possible. I have a friend of mine who's a PhD in real high rank, you know, he's a guy who really knows the stuff economics, and he says, and has worked in very high levels, what he says is, I think, Garland, that it's kind of a PR move, that there's nothing they can really do to address inflation, and they have to look like they're and here's a guy who sat in circles of very powerful people with these types of, and he said, so I think they're doing it to make it look like they're doing something, so they can say to the American people, we're addressing inflation, even though they know it's only going to make it worse. They're hoping that they can ride out this thing and at least not have a recession till after the midterms, but they know they're driving us into a recession for a PR move. That's how bad of governing we have.
That's so bleak. And it's so, and I think you're right on with it. You know, as a matter of fact, it was a Thursday or Friday, it came out that the ruble was the #1 currency in the world. So much for those sanctions. And, you know, and how the US uses sanctions, like as if, I don't know, they're just punishment, and they hurt the working people of whatever country they're trying to sanction. They definitely don't hurt, you know, any oligarchs or anything like that. It's such bullshit. And it's not diplomatic. It's not a diplomatic tool that's evoking, you know, cooperation or partnership. You know, and so even when you talk about non-military action, it's still pointed at hurting the everyday working class citizen in whatever country that is. And it's just so sad. And it's so, you know, awful that we're still in this mindset of scarcity and lack and keeping people afraid. But I suppose that's how they think, to keep us, you know, kind of like sheep. However, like you said earlier, there might be, you know, some pushback. And like when you take away the bread, when there's literally no food on the table and people are backed in a corner, then you're going to have civil unrest. But I guess my question to that is, have we reached a fascist state where they'll just push back that unrest, won't allow it? You know what I'm saying? Like now, like DeSantis just passed a law in Florida that you can't go to, you know how they were doing the right to choose. They were at some of the judges' homes, the Kavanaughs, I think, outside protesting. And so he's prohibiting public demonstrations at private residence, which under the Constitution, there's time, place, manner. So if anyone knows constitutional law, he can probably wiggle in there and say, well, there's time, place, manner when you talk about free speech. But I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, here's what I think, that you know, brutal ways of suppressing uprisings, because what happens when a government, with particularly an empire, but when a government starts to collapse, when an empire collapses, their issue first and foremost is internal uprisings. The people in one of the things that happened in the Soviet Union, most Americans have some fantasized heroic thing of Donald Trump saying, you know, bring this wall down and stuff like that. But the reality of it was something very different. And what happens in empires is one of the things that happened in the Soviet Union, that is, at the center of an empire, you have a group of people who feel like they are the privileged of the empire, right? They're in the center. That's the US. We're going out stealing people's bananas and coffee beans and whatever the hell, palm oil for next to nothing, suppressing the citizens, overthrowing their governments, doing everything. But the people here are driving nice cars and living pretty good, got great jobs, right? So people here at the center of the empire, they wouldn't come out and say it, but they were willing to like turn their heads and like, yeah, we just killed 2.5 million people in Vietnam. Hey, look at that new F-150 truck that came out. I think I'm going to get one, right? That was Americans, right? We ignored what our government was doing because at the center of the empire, the expectation, we were arrogant. And let me say this. There was and you may know of a famous experiment where they had these people playing Monopoly. And one side of people, they gave them all of the money. And the other side, they gave them like nothing to start, and they play. And of course, the person who had all the money in the hotels would win. But what they found out was, as the game went on, the people who had been given all the advantages, after a while, started to think they won it themselves, and they started mistreating the people. It's just a stinking Monopoly game. They give you all the hotels and houses and money. They give me like $50 and you win, and you're like, I'm a far better strategist than Garland. That's why I won. My point is, the people in the American empire actually felt like the countries in South America and Africa were like poorer than we are, because they were like morally and ethically inferior. We didn't stop to think that our government was overthrowing their governments, installing fascist puppets and slaughtering them like dogs, and forcing them to do what we did as we starved them and drove their country in hyperinflation. And as a result of that, we lived real darn well. All we got to the part was we live well. So it must mean that we are morally and ethically and intellectually superior to all of these people out here. Well, now the chickens are coming home to roost. Initially in the empire is like an octopus. All of these tentacles are out all over the world, sucking in oil and bananas and coffee beans and sucking in all these resources to the center of the empire, and the empire is living fat and happy, right? But after a while, it turns around. And now the resources are going out the tentacles from the center of the empire and to the other parts of the empire, just to keep the empire afloat. And what happened was, after a while, the Russian people were like, well, why is it the people out in Poland and Kazakhstan and all of these other satellite countries have nice schools and roads, and here we are in the middle of Russia, we're the ones supposed to be living. Again, the people at the center of the empire expect privilege, and they get really pissed. And so the Americans expect privilege because they've been keeping their mouths shut and their eyes closed at the center of the empire, taking advantage of their government going out whacking the daylights out of everybody else. And now the chickens are coming home to roost. That $40 billion is an example. Now the money's going out of the empire to try to keep the unipolar moment going, and the unipolar moment done ran off. So that's a wordy thing to say,
it's the end of the unipolar movement. So Reif, I wanted to ask you about chats. How are we doing? Do you have any questions?
We have a few questions.
Or anything
a lot of them you already kind of answered. Let me go back to one of them asked about why they thought, I think it was Green Meadows. I just had to scroll back up to the top. Why you thought that we're invading Somalia now. And I think you covered a bit of that.
I think it's a smokescreen. I think that we're putting troops in Somalia because we want to have military infrastructure there, but not necessarily for Somalia, which is a failed state, but because the U.S. wants to up the ante next door in Eritrea, in with the TPLF in Ethiopia. I think that's about. That in the Horn, in that area of Africa, the U.S. wants to upgrade their status and have more infrastructure. And so they'll tell you they're sending 500 in, just so they're sending troops in. And now when the others keep coming, it isn't like if a troop dies there or something, you won't be able to say, hey, I didn't know we didn't have troops in Somalia.
Right. They let it leak out. So isn't it interesting? That came out when it did, and it was kind of stealth, like the way it was done. All right, what else, Reif?
Alex Suarez asked, my question is, who is more of a sellout, Guaido or Zelensky?
I'll let you take this one, Garland.
They're the same guy. They're the exact same guy. If you think about the way empires work, right? Think of the Vichy government in France in World War II, right? What do? You go to a country, you find some traitor and somebody who's willing to be a puppet for their own gain and is willing to sell out their entire country. And you just say, okay, well, that person's the leader now. It doesn't care what the people want. This is not about democracy. Zelensky, if you think about Zelensky, I'll make this like the 1 minute version. Okay. The guy, Ihor Kolomoisky, is a Ukrainian oligarch, and he owned this gigantic media conglomerate, the biggest one in Ukraine. I think it was called like 1-on-1 or 1+1 Media, something like that, right? So this guy creates a TV series called Servant of the People. He hires a comedian named Vladimir Zelensky. In the TV program, in this comedy, he's a teacher who becomes president. And in this comedy, he wants Ukraine to join NATO and the EU. Well, this program goes on for 2 years, and then suddenly the same oligarch, Ihor Kolomoisky, starts a political party, and he names it Servant of the People, and he runs a president. The guy who was president in Servant of the People comedy program, who in that program for the last 2 years has been preaching, we should join NATO and the EU. He simply transfers that in, and then what's his name? And then Zelensky runs, completely lies. He pulls a Joe Biden on him. He says he's the that he is the peace president. He gets elected, and he's a puppet for the U.S. So the Zelensky was really a political and psychological operation that was pulled on the Ukrainian people. You know, right. That was intelligence playing that game. Oh, so the idea that people think that Zelensky has any authority, has any agency whatsoever in Ukraine is patently absurd. The guy just does. He's Juan Guaido. He's a guy that they stick in front of a green screen, and he reads off a teleprompter. It's a joke. He can't go to the bathroom without the U.S. State Department giving him permission.
That's true. That is true. All right. Any more questions or comments?
Let me turn my mic on. Does Garland see any other countries getting involved in Somalia to oppose U.S. imperialism there?
Well, here's what I can already tell you, and that is one of the reasons that the U.S. is upset in that part of the country, or that part of the world, is because they were funding the TPLF to try to overthrow. Because the TPLF, up until 2018, they were a brutal, genocidal, ethno-fascist, dictatorial government in Somalia, and the people actually didn't overthrow them. They democratically elected a new government, right? Oh, by the way, one of the top people in the TPLF who was accused of being involved in all kind of genocidal stuff is Dr. Tedros, whatever the hell his name is, who's in charge of the WHO right now. He was one of the top leaders of the TPLF. Look him up, who's been accused of unthinkable acts of murder and genocide. So how about that? Yeah. Who's not even a doctor. He's not a medical doctor. He's never treated a patient. How the hell is he heading the WHO? Of course, it's all part of the game. But my point being that what happened was, so the US arms the TPLF like the day that, like a day or so after Biden got elected. It might have been the day or the day after Biden got elected, the TPLF attacks the Ethiopian government. Attacks the Ethiopian government. The U.S. is feeding them arms, but the Russians and the Chinese give the Ethiopians a bunch of drones, and they knock the hell out of the TPLF. So you see what's going on here? They end up getting some Russians, and so they end up getting some help, getting a little help from their friends to stop the U.S. from overthrowing the government. I think also the Ethiopians had some big contracts with the Russians and the Chinese, and keep in mind that none of the African countries or South American countries or any countries with brown or yellow or red people in the world, to be quite frank, are going along with the Russian sanctions. So they're still doing their thing with Russia there, and so I think that's part of it too.
There was people in Rockfin that was mentioning that that there was a young female journalist that was explaining that Tedros was part of the terrorist organization in Ethiopia, right? And of course, Ethiopia objects to the alleged misconduct of the WHO chief Tedros. Like, of course they do, because why wouldn't they not? But
Hermela Argawi is her name. She's awesome. That's
her name.
I follow her on Twitter. Yeah, Hermela's awesome. Hermela, and it's like Aragawi or something. But everybody should find her and follow her. She's awesome with this stuff. Another guy named Thomas C. Mountain.
She's in our show right now, right? Like chatting.
Hermela?
I don't know if she is or isn't, but someone was definitely talking about her specifically. So
I'm a big fan of hers. I hope to interview her sometime.
I think she was on Jimmy like last week. Yes. I think, if everyone's that was a great interview there.
I think I interviewed her a while back. I just can't remember. I'm pretty sure I interviewed her a while back. I just can't remember what but she's awesome.
I enjoyed being on your show. In fact, would you tell everyone who's listening who might not know where to find you and when your show is and what's going on with you?
Oh my gosh, I'm all over the place. So I've got Garland Nixon. I'm on Rockfin. You can look me up. I'm on, of course, YouTube. My favorite is Rockfin, but I'm also on YouTube. So look me up and follow my show. I do regular terrestrial radio shows. I have a show on Radio Sputnik that is in Washington, D.C., Monday through Friday from 6 to 8 p.m. I also have a show on Pacifica Radio, KPFK in California, Pacific time, 2 to 3 every Monday, except the last couple of Mondays I haven't been on because they're doing a fund drive. You know, money's too tight to mention these days. So that's KPFK, Mondays, Pacific 2 to 3. WPFW, which is also Pacifica. I said Pacifica. That's in Washington, D.C., Mondays, Fridays from 6 to 7. So it's Pacifica in D.C., Pacifica, KPFK, and Sputnik in D.C. So I'm busy. And then I do almost every day I'm doing my YouTube. I love that.
I have your Twitter, YouTube, and Rockfin down in the description below if anyone needs to find that quickly. So
there you go.
Cover you there.
You go. We're putting that on the big screen.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Yeah, and then I really enjoyed being on your show as well, and you've been doing radio for quite a while too, as well. Can you talk a little bit about like how you got interested in geopolitics and just a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. I got an interesting background. So I was a police officer in law enforcement for many, many years. I retired from law enforcement. I was a major, and I was working with the governor's office doing terrorism stuff. And also I was kind of a police official, you might say, when I retired. I then went to the local community college, and I taught criminal justice for 3 years. All along, I had been doing radio, and I started doing some radio around 2000 and on and off. And then 2006, I started doing my first weekly show on WPFW 89.3 FM. I was on one night a month back then. And then by the 2013, I got my own show. In 2010, actually, I got noticed by Fox News and picked up by Fox. And I started doing Fox News like weekly. In around 2010, 2011, I was on all the Fox shows for years and years. I mean, and then I started doing it. And actually I did a TV show called Chasing News with Bill Spadia. And that was in Philadelphia, New York, all over Pennsylvania, Jersey, stuff like that. I did that weekly for several years. So, I've done a lot of radio, a lot of TV, a lot of Fox News. I was the lefty on Fox News. For many, many years. I really enjoyed that. Believe it or not, up until recently, I was on the National Board of Directors for the American Civil Liberties Union. But I resigned. And to be quite frank, I resigned over the COVID mandates because I didn't believe in mandating. I wasn't an anti-vax, everybody, they call it anti-vaxxer. I was opposed to the mandates. I didn't feel that people should get fired and lose their jobs over a health decision. I felt that was a reasonable position to take. The ACLU took a different position, and I, left the board. Then I enjoyed it. I felt like a lot of times at the ACLU, I was doing good stuff. I mean, and it was fun. And, come on, here's an organization that brings in $300 million a year. To be on the board of directors, you feel like you're responsible for something, and you're making big decisions and powerful decisions, and you're getting things done. And I felt positive, but I had to draw the line somewhere, and I did.
Well, that's good. I mean, we all have to do that sometimes, and it is tough, especially when it kind of makes you feel like the other stuff that you're doing is lost then. But you can still do your activism and your advocacy for those right in the work that you do now. So well,
here's the thing about it. Luckily for me, somewhere years ago back in there, I started studying Zen, the philosophy of Zen, not Buddhism. And so it really helped me to accept life for what it is. So I don't say, oh, darn, I missed that. Nah, it's like if you're walking down the street and you come to a stop sign and you can only go left or right. You go and take a direction and you go right. Something's going to be there that wasn't there before. It's not that it's a wrong to go, not to go left. So when I had to make a decision, like say I'm leaving the ACLU, there's no point whining or crying about it. I was there for a long time. I did a lot of great things, had a lot of fun. And now it's time to move on and see what life brings me next. That's all. So I wasn't upset. And the other part is, am I an activist? I don't know. Here's what I have to say. I read, I study, I learn things, and I like to talk. And so I'm just doing what I enjoy doing. I mean, it's almost like if a bird is singing and you walk by and you happen to like it, that's fine. But if nobody walks by, the bird's going to sing because it's just what he does. And that's what I am. I run my friggin' mouth. You should hear me on the phone with my friends. I'm doing the same thing, but it's just like, I happen to be lucky enough to get paid for it or to find a way to enjoy it online or whatever the case may be.
Well, that's awesome. And that's a good way to look at it. And I know sometimes those labels are like, I think recently somebody introduced me as an activist and I thought, I don't get arrested. I'm not like at a bunch of marches, I do my thing, I do my advocacy, but I don't know if I could go that far. Right. So I understand what you're saying, and labels don't really help anyway. I think we're all just trying to, well, now it's not just the challenge of giving out information, it's getting information. I don't know about you, Garland, but I find it harder and harder to get really good, independent, investigative resourcing, because you can't get it in mainstream corporate media, and they're banning and censoring, well, as you know, from Sputnik, and they banned, RT and the work that I was doing, and took down Lee Camp's podcast, my podcast. And now we're, doing it on our own. But my question is just, how do you feel about, because you've been in the media space for a long time and you work for Fox, how do you feel about it now compared to when you were kind of starting out or just earlier in time in the earlier 2000s? Is it really devolved as much as I'm perceiving, or is it always kind of been that way?
Well, that's the question, the $10,000 question, right? How much of it is that it's gotten worse, and how much is it that we've woken up to realize that more and more people? Because I think part of it was they were lying to us, but not as many people had figured out that we were being lied to. So they didn't have the need to suppress the message as much because not as many people had figured it out. And I think there's a combination of things, and that is their lies are getting grander. There are more people that are figuring it out, and pushing back. And there are more platforms that are, whether it's Rockfin or Odyssey or whatever the hell, you know what I mean? There are more platforms. I've got lots of places. Like every day I will go to the various countries. I will go to RT and Sputnik and TASS. I will go to Global Times and Jinhao. I'll go to Press TV. I'll go to Middle East Eye. I'll go to, on and on and on, Orinoco Tribune.
That's where I go too. Yeah.
Mint Press. Consortium News. I mean, I could go A Popular Resistance, People's Dispatch, on and on. So, you search and search and search, but you can find antiwar.com. You can find stuff out there if you look hard enough, and then you start to bookmark the different places.
Well said. Well said. Well, everyone, please support Garland and all his work, and all the independent content creators, including INN, which is Independent News Network. Thank you, Reef, and thank you, Indy. And Greg did some of our graphics today. And Garland, you know what? I just want to say I had planned to have you on the show, and then some things were happening with scheduling, and I got to just kind of reach out to you quickly today, and you were so gracious to just come at, a shorter notice and talk with me. And it was such a great conversation. And I always feel like I know more when I leave a conversation with you. I really do. So thank you.
You're welcome. Well, it doesn't matter if you know more, as long as you feel like you know more.
There you go. On that note, everyone, thanks for joining us. And please catch it. If you didn't catch the whole show, catch the restream. It's on YouTube, Rockfin, Twitter, Twitch, and you can find it there. Look for Garland, look for him on Twitter, make sure and follow him. And so there you have it, everyone. Keep fighting the fight. Good night.